Hi, everybody. Welcome. This is a presentation regarding preservation of carrots presented by the San Bernardino Master Food Preserver Program. Next. A little bit about housekeeping. We are going to, we ask that you turn your cameras off to save bandwidth. This presentation is being recorded, so if you're on this presentation live, please make sure your microphones are muted to make sure we don't have any background noise. Please feel free to ask questions in the chat or at the end of the presentation. And then if you would like information like a copy of this presentation, please feel free to email me at djdenton@ucanr.edu. Next. And a little bit about the UCCE San Bernardino County Master Food Preservers. My name is Dee, and I am a graduate of 2017, and I am a volunteer with the Master Food Preserver Program, as well as the coordinator for the program. And our program is a division of the Agricultural and Natural Resources. So you might see it listed out there as UCANR. And we are a trained group of volunteers teaching research-based practices of safe home food preservation to the residents of California. That is our mission, but if you are calling or reaching out to us from out of state, we'll certainly share our information. It's not necessarily just all residents of California. If you have the inquiry to want to know about food preservation, we are going to share all the information we have with you. And then through our presentation, if there's any product or company name that is mentioned specifically by a brand, it's not an endorsement of that product. It's just a lot of these things, for instance, like ball jars is something that everybody is very familiar with, but there are other jars that could be out there on the market. So just know that when I mention anything by brand name, it's just not an endorsement for that product at all. Next. So a little bit about the UCCE resources here in San Bernardino County. We do have other programs that work along with us, which we have FNEP, which is Expanded Food and Nutrition. And then we have 4-H, which you may have heard of, Master Gardeners, who is a sister program or a parent program here for our county. And then we have a host of academic advisors that are available at your disposal to answer questions. These advisors are in natural resources, horticulture, dairy, and urban agriculture. Next. And just before we get started here a little bit, just a very brief information about food safety basics. We want to make sure that you wash your hands and wash your hands often throughout your process. And then you want to make sure that you clean, then sanitize your work area with tools. It's really important, the sanitizing step, like when you're spraying a sanitizer on your work surface, that you want to let it rest there for 30 seconds to a minute before you wipe that off to make sure that it actually has a chance to sanitize your area. And then don't overlook, especially, or even when you're dealing with gardening tools, to clean and sanitize your tools. So in case if your tool has come in contact with some kind of fungus or something like that, that you don't spread it to another plant or spread that along your way when you use that tool again. You want to make sure that you have your hair pulled back or covered in some sense, depending on if you have short hair or long hair. And then use a clean apron. So an apron is one of those things that you may or may not use on a regular basis. But keep in mind that an apron is not only there to protect your clothes from being soiled, but protect anything that comes off of your clothes getting into your product when you're processing it. And then one thing I always like to mention is that the food safety golden rule, when in doubt, throw it out. Never taste food that looks or smells strange. I think we've probably all done that at one point in time, but it's really not a good habit to do. Just throw the food away. Foods containing bacteria can look, smell, and taste normal. And then most bacteria that causes foodborne illnesses are odorless, colorless, and tasteless. So just because it doesn't have a bad taste, if you are unsure of it, you could, you instead of running the risk of getting potentially sick or making somebody else in your family or your friends sick, it's just best to discard it. And then the goal of food preservation is to actually keep foodborne pathogens from growing in our food by destroying it or inhibiting its growth in your container. Next, when I say container, I mean your jars, or if you're freezing them in plastic containers. So a little bit about canning methods. I know today we were talking specifically about carrots. And carrots actually, if you look over on the right-hand side of our pH value, you can see that they fall into a low acid type characteristic. So the canning method is determined by the acidity of the product. So the acidity for high acidity products, the preservation method would be a boiling water canner or an atmospheric steam canner. For low acid foods, a pressure canner is what you would need. And it's not a pressure cooker, it's a pressure canner. And we'll talk just a little bit more about that in a few extra slides. So one other thing that I wanted to mention here, and I'm probably going to mention it a little bit later too, is that you may see recipes that for pickling items, and it allows you to boiling water bath can these items or atmospheric steam items. And the reason that is that even though the carrots are a low acid food, by adding the vinegar, you're adding the acidity into that food so that it makes you be able to process them by a boiling water canner or an atmospheric steam canner. Next. So why two canning methods? So the reason that we have that is for the concern over Clostridium botulinum bacteria. And this is one thing that you would really become fearful of, or not fearful of, but be aware of when you are canning those low acid types of vegetables. That's the concern is that in low acid foods that there's the moist and anaerobic and room temperature, that creates the environment for that toxin to grow to cause botulism. Botulism is actually the condition. What actually is the bacteria is the Clostridium botulinum. And Clostridium botulinum does not grow in a high acid environment or a dry environment and aerobic or cold temperature. So when you're pickling your products, you really don't have to be concerned over Clostridium botulinum or being able to cause botulism, because that acid is going to make it an environment where that actual bacteria is not going to be able to grow. So if you're going to be canning carrots, just say just a jar of carrots, what you're going to be more focused on is creating an inhospitable environment. And in order to create that, you need to get that up to 240 degrees to kill that spore and then the bacteria. So that needs to be in a pressure canner where you can reach your 240 degrees, and a boiling water bath process will not create that high of a temperature. So you always want to assume that it is present in your product that you're preserving, and that there's no uniform distribution of that particular bacteria. So a little bit about pickled products, because we are going to be sharing a recipe today. And this is actually one of the ways that I like to preserve my carrots. You want to make sure that your vinegar has a 5% acidity. It's really important, especially with some of these other vinegars that are out there, that you may have a lower acidity in your vinegar. And in order to make sure that you have an environment where you're not going to have anything growing in it, that 5% acidity is key. So read your labels. Now for your salt and vinegar are actually going to prevent that microbiotical growth. And then a low or no salt recipe, you would need to make sure that you have a recipe that's specific to a no or low salt. Do not make adjustments to your recipes thinking that you can create that. It's not recommended. Those have not been tested for safety purposes. So canning salt is what most recipes call for. You have other recipes that may call for kosher salt or allow for that substitution. The main thing that you want to make sure is that your salt is a pure salt and that there's been no anti-caking agents added to those, because those anti-caking agents will actually create a cloudy brine. So if you've maybe if you didn't have canning salt available and you perhaps use table salt, most table salt is iodized table salt, so it's going to create that cloudy brine. So for kosher salt, you can substitute by weight. And I will make a key or note to make sure that I add this difference here because salt is not equal. So when you are substituting for kosher, do you think I could be able to say that? Kosher salt, that you need to make sure that you substitute it by weight. So 1 cup of canning salt is equal to about 10.2 ounces of kosher salt. So you can see that there's a difference there. The kosher salt is actually going to be a much higher by taking up space, just because that salt is a little bit more sturdy. So using cup for cup is not going to be a way to get an accurate measure through that. You want to make sure that you have that by weighing it by your ounces. So oops. Next screen, please. So high acid canning equipment, you can go ahead and just keep clicking. We'll go ahead and pull those all up, Maggie. So these are examples of high acid canning equipment. So you can see that we have a boiling water bath canner here, but you can also create a boiling water bath canning system out of a stock pot in your own kitchen. You just want to make sure that you have a rack on the bottom of your pot, and that the jars that you're using to can in are not so tall that you will not be able to cover those jars with 1 to 2 inches of water. In the center of our screen, we have an atmospheric steam canner. This is a specialized piece of equipment that you would need to invest in. And then over here on the right is a multi-use canner. So you would be able to possibly cook other soup stocks in, or there might be some steam canners, but again, it would be at a separate investment. For boiling water bath canning, like I said, you can create one from your own pots and pans that you have in your kitchen now. So you would not have to have a separate investment. And that's actually how I do this in my kitchen. I do not have one of those fancy granite type canners. I've created one with my soup stock pan. Next screen. That rack is also very important that we make sure. So I also want to make sure that I mention processing time. So when you're processing your product, you need to make sure that you're aware of the current altitude that you're at, depending on if you're processing in your home or if you've gone over to a friend's place, that you need to make sure that you check your altitude so that you make necessary adjustments when you are in your boiling water bath processing time. So a generic processing time for altitude adjustments is between 1 and 3,000 feet. Your recipe has been created and assuming that you're at a 1,000 foot level. Most of us here in California are going to be in that first level of adjustment between 1 and 3,000 feet. So if your processing time on your recipe calls for 10 minutes, because you're going to be, so say for myself, I live at 1,263 square feet or 1,263 feet. What that would mean is that I would add an additional 5 minutes to my processing time. So my 15-minute processing time then becomes 20 minutes. It's pretty straightforward, but if you have questions about your adjustments for your processing time, please feel free to reach out to the Master Food Preservers via Facebook or via the email that I had mentioned earlier. So next. So low acid canners, these are pressure canners, and these are not necessarily pressure cookers. Pressure cookers are not all pressure cookers are pressure canners, but pressure canners can be used as a pressure cooker. So you just need to make sure that you have the right equipment. If you are going to be just creating a jar of carrots and you don't want to acidify them, meaning them that they're pickled, that you have a pressure canner and not a pressure cooker to process your items. So what we have here on this screen here is we have a dial gauge over on the left. And this is probably either a Presto or a Miro type canner. And then over on the right-hand side is a weighted gauge, and this is an all-American canner. Now, the differences on these canners is that this All-American canner is like the cream of the crop. It's the Ultra Deluxe. Can be very costly to get this, upwards of $250+ to get a canner. Whereas the Miro or the Presto canner on the other side, on the left-hand side, may be under $100 investment, depending on where you have access to getting canners from. Next screen. So today's shared recipe is going to be shared by Beatrice Etchison, who is a fellow master food preserver. Beatrice always brings in some wonderful items for us to share when we are having our classes or when we have gotten together for events. And she presented this and was very passionate about sharing this recipe. And I actually think that I have sampled this recipe in the past. So Beatrice, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and talk a little bit about your recipe.
Hi, everyone. Dee, that was a fantastic presentation that you have given so far. So I'm at the tail end, so please bear with me. I am a master food preserver since 2014, and I can highly recommend that program if there are people here in attendance that are not master food preservers yet. Yes, the recipe that you see in front of you, I call this Beatrice's signature ginger pickled carrots. I have to assume that you all can hear me.
You're good, Beatrice. We're good. We can hear you loud and clear.
Thank you. All right. I'm not going to read the recipe to you. You see it here. You probably can make a copy of it somehow. I will provide some highlights about the recipe. Technically, this is not an approved recipe, but it is from a book that is published and is out there, that can be ordered. And from what I have seen in the book, I have trusted several of the recipes myself. Now, if you want something that is very similar and it's an approved recipe, I would recommend the recipe out of the book, So Easy to Preserve. And that book actually was our class book during our training. In that book, all of these recipes have been tested. And so therefore, if you are a beginner and just dabble into pickled items, you may want to look at the recipes in that book. The two recipes are similar, and the one that you have in front of you, what intrigued me when I saw it was that it had ginger in it, star anise, and garlic. So sometimes you can deviate somewhat with the spices.
Yes, that is absolutely right, Beatrice. Deviating and maybe omitting some spices or changing up your spices within reason is acceptable. One thing you would not want to deviate from is the amount of acid, so the amount of vinegar you're adding to your product and the amount of water.
Right, right. So the other thing that I would recommend is that you can do the recipe in half. It is not recommended to double a recipe, whether it's this one or the ones in the book.
Yes, very important.
Yeah. Now, there are other sources for approved recipes, and of course, that is provided when you go through the program. One of the centers or one of the resources is the National Center for Food Presentation.
Yes.
I have gleaned a number of recipes there. Sometimes I compare the ingredients and see what works out best. In the recipe that you have in front of you, it just says white vinegar. So by now, you know, we are looking for a 5% vinegar.
Yes,
And
very important.
in the recipe, it talked about kosher salt. Now,
Maggie, if you can go to the next screen, I think it actually has the steps where it might have that information.
oh, okay.
There you go. There we go.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, as you can see, vinegar is the 5%. And when he talks about the kosher salt, you can use pickling salt. And because it's a very small quantity, as far as the weight is concerned, I would think that's interchangeable here.
Now, when you did this, did you have any problems that you experienced when you made your signature carrots that you could share with everybody?
Okay, I had absolutely no problems with this recipe. First of all, I was intrigued when I saw it in the book. I mean, I had to do it. I did it. I read the recipe very carefully. If you are a beginner, I recommend read the recipe twice. It really helps to conceptualize what you have in front of you. And
absolutely.
I mean, it's a very simple recipe. If you are familiar with pickling items, you should have no problem. As I said, what intrigued me was the spices. I grow my own ginger, so I can just go out to the garden and grab some fresh ginger, which I really love. And when you make the recipe and you share it with someone, because we consider this not an approved recipe, you should refrigerate the product afterwards. Now, I have in my years, and I have made it for many, many years. I've never had the need to put it in the refrigerator. The product actually goes very fast. I share it with others, and I do mention to them that they should refrigerate it. But personally, I have it just for a couple of weeks and it's gone.
Right. And so I'll just elaborate a little bit more on that. When we are talking about research-based recipes as the Master Food Preserver program, we have a set of recipes and resources that we defer to, but we're not by any means suggesting that somebody only use recipes from our resources. We would just like to make sure that we're educating you on how to make a good decision about knowing if the recipe is safe. You can see this recipe covers your 5% acidity in your vinegar. It also mentions in there that you should be adjusting for your altitude, thinking logically about a recipe that you see that may not be a tested recipe. You should do some due diligence about asking some questions and making sure, then you can make a decision on your own if you feel like this recipe would be safe for you to process.
Well, I know, but I mean, I gotta.
All right. Now, what I like to emphasize is that if you are a beginner, if you have not done a lot of pickling, very limited, this is really a very nice recipe. And it is put in front of you to whet your appetite. And, you know, we all had our humble beginnings. my beginning was back in 2014, and I have made this particular recipe on many occasions. And of course, I'm still here. So there has not been an issue. It has never gone bad on me in any way. So I do hope that you take your time and do this. And if you should run into any issues or problem, you have people you can call on. We are here to help. So don't hesitate, but be encouraged to give it a try.
Thank you, Beatrice. I really appreciate that. I really appreciate you joining in on the conversation today and encouraging people. So a little bit about canning recipe is to make sure that you're using current and reputable recipes and methods. And one way to make sure that you can double check on this and just ensure that what you are doing is a tested and research-based recipe is follow the National Center for Food Home Preservation recommendations. And I have listed here the website where you can access this information. They have all sorts of recipes and free information and even access to the guide, which you can download for free. But if you'd want to have that in a print form, you would have to pay for that, but you can download it for free. Great information. It's actually the same information that we use when we are teaching our trainees to go out and share information with the public on food preservation safe in your home. So products and research has changed since grandma's canning days. So if you have a recipe that has been passed down from generation to generation, I would never say that you shouldn't do that, that you can kill you, but just make sure that you look at your recipe and then maybe apply the things that you see and are hear from the National Center, and making sure that there isn't any updates or changes that need to be done like that. And then items that are not recommended that specifically just straight across the board is open kettle canning, and then oven canning and paraffin wax seal. And I'll go a little bit more about those in just a second, but I just want to say if you don't have a reputable recipe or recipes that you don't feel meet the standards and you're unsure about the safety of it, because you could always do those recipes and either store that in the refrigerator and consume that within a short period of time or use the freezer. So going back to these three methods that I've listed up here that are not recommended, open kettle canning is canning when it is actually you bring the temperature up in your jar, and it's mainly used, I mean, not mainly used, but quite frequently used when you're making jams. When you have the jam and you've got that jam nice and bubbly hot in your jar, then you put it into a hot jar, and then you put your band and your lid on there, and then you let it sit on the counter and seal naturally and create that vacuum seal from the heat. We always recommend that you process your jars if you are going to make this a shelf stable item. And the reason that is that open kettle canning is that you may not have reached the temperature to make sure that you are prohibiting the bacteria or any growth in your jars. So it's really important to add that water bath canning step, or make sure that you have a pressure canning in there. And then oven canning is just not a safe practice that we teach through our program. Just for you can possibly crack those jars very easily, and it's kind of an awkward process. So I definitely we wouldn't recommend that. And then paraffin wax seal, we do no longer recommend paraffin wax sealing, and especially living out here on the West Coast is one of those reasons is we can have warmer days out here in the West Coast, and where that wax seal could actually get mushy, and it could you could have something going on there, and that lid could actually open up, and then as our temperatures get cooler, that wax would contract and then reseal that jar, and you would not have known that something happened. So that's why we would not recommend wear paraffin wax seals. Next screen. And I think that here's some more resources that we have. We're wrapping up our presentation. So for the San Bernardino County Master Food Preservers, if you go to ucanr.edu/sites/SBMFP, you can get access to training or videos of a video library under our resource section on our website. And then also free publications and other recipes that are available, as well as methods on processing for all food aspects of food preservation. You can reach us on Facebook, which is SBMFP on Facebook. And then our statewide website, which is mfp.ucanr.edu. You have access again to the video library, publications library, and the recipe card library, which you can also get through our local website here in San Bernardino. And then the National Center for Home Preservation is a free resource for you, and it has all kinds of information on every aspect of food preservation, not just boiling water bath canning or pressure canning. They talk about fermentation and freezing and dehydration as well. And then next slide. So that wraps up our presentation here for Master Food Preserver. If you have the desire to become a Master Food Preserver, we're always looking for new volunteers. If you have that desire to teach in your community and grow in a program where you can share information about food safety and safety techniques and preservation techniques, in our classes, we talk about food safety. We also provide training on food safety, boiling water bath and atmospheric steam canning. We teach you on pressure canning, and going into that, we're talking about canning jams and jellies, and then pickling and fermenting, and then dehydrating fruits and vegetables and freezing. So if you are interested in becoming a Master Food Preserver, our classes meet several times a month. And then you would have hands-on labs and quizzes, and you'd have little workshops, study things that you would work on. And then we would, you take a little quiz, and then you take a final. And our intent is to teach you and encourage you to go out into the public and share this information. So we make sure that you understand these techniques and have well-rounded information on those. So if you're interested in becoming a Master Food Preserver, you can visit ucanr.edu/sites/SBMFP, and there's a section on our main page that will click you to a survey where you can leave your name and answer a few questions. And then when we are forming classes, we will reach out to you and let you know that we have classes forming. We typically train once a year, and we only train about 15 volunteers in our county because we need to make sure that we have access to equipment and facilities to train. So we do a much smaller training group than, say, the Master Gardener program. Next screen. So I just wanted to thank you for attending our presentation today. And our tagline for the San Bernardino Master Food Preservers, and actually the Master Food Preserver program statewide, is preserve today and relish tomorrow. So I didn't see any questions, but if you have any questions, you can feel free to reach out to us via Facebook or contact me at djdenton@ucanr.edu. Thank you.